right. Welcome to episode 334 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bell. How are you, my good sir?
I am awesome. And so for those of you looking at or watching the podcast on YouTube, you'll hopefully notice some important changes that I felt like were overdue after 15 years. So, for those of you who are in audio, it doesn't really do anything, but we're going to try to up our game visually, at least. I hired some very high priced consultants to help figure out like what do we need to do, and their first recommendation was like, show less of you,
right?
Make yourself smaller and show something else on the screen, and here we are.
Well, I mean, what I heard was hire models and stop putting yourself on screen at all and just give them scripts. That's what I heard.
Well, that's the next step, is to do the whole deep fake, beach volleyball team thing.
Right.
So we'll see. Anyway,
yes.
On this episode, we have a couple of exciting topics. I think there's not a lot of like explosive news as there's been in the past, like with the React vulnerability, but some interesting things related to parked domains. Device code phishing continues to be a problem. Amazon, tripped over a North Korean IT worker. We have some interesting challenges with AI generated proof of concepts. And then my favorite topic, which is internet service, exposed services to the internet. That's going to round it out.
It is one of, I mean, every time you go to dinner with your relatives, you bring it up and they're begging you to stop.
I do. So before we go any further, I do want to say thank you very much to our Patreon sponsors. And just a reminder, if you do want to have access to our episodes a week early, you can become a sponsor. Right there is our link. It's patreon.com/defensivesec. Thank you very, very much.
At the moment, let's see. We have 56 folks contributing to us, which is amazing. That is super cool. And we appreciate each and every one of you. And I'm sorry for Jerry showing up outside your house at 2 a.m. I've talked to him about it. It won't happen again.
Well, what can I say?
I mean, holding the boombox over your head is a nice touch.
I'm all in, right? I'm all in. And just a quick reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers.
Certainly not my attempts at jokes.
That's very true. Okay. So with that, we will get into some stories, which is very, very festive.
It is.
Dumpster fire or trash fire for those of you who can't see the screen.
It's the time. It's the time of year for dumpster fires and trash fires and all sorts of things.
That's right. All right. So first up is parked domain serving malware. This one comes from Krebs on Security. And the title here is Most Parked Domains Now Serving Malicious Content.
Jerry, what's a parked domain?
A parked domain is a domain that is not in active use. It's kind of a placeholder. I would say in the past was an advertising opportunity where domain companies, domain prospectors would buy large quantities of domains and just park them, where such that they would resolve. But they would show advertisements or what have you. And as Krebs describes in this article, about 11 years ago, roughly 5% of those parked domains were observed serving malware of some kind. And as of now, the new news is that about 90% of these parked domains are actually serving malware. What's I think concerning, I suppose, is that this isn't just blindly serving malware to all visitors. There's actually some intelligence behind it. where it is detecting, whether you are coming from a VPN, if you are coming from a residential IP, or, it's basically trying to weed out people who might be trying to identify if a particular site is malicious or not. And if they identify it as something other than a normal person coming from a residential IP address, they'll actually redirect you to a benign website like Amazon or what have you. But if you are part of its target market, it will, it'll send you on to one of a number of different scam sites. Some of them show the scareware, like it pops up, fills your screen, and tells you that you have to pay a ransom, or you need to install antivirus, or lots of different variations on that. Some will actually, if your browser is known to be vulnerable to something, it'll try to inject malware, and so on and so forth. So this is, I think, largely an individual consumer problem, but I think the pervasiveness of it means that it's almost certainly strays into kind of corporate IT or corporate security space. And that's what really made me want to bring this up is, it's difficult, very difficult to block this. As they point out, there's so many permutations on domain misspellings and domains that your employees might go to, that it's almost impossible to feasibly block all of those. And unless this these malicious ad networks are intentionally filtering out your user agents or your IP addresses or what have you, it's likely that your employees are being fed the same sorts of malicious or potentially malicious content that could turn into a problem for you. Sure. And there's unfortunately there's not a lot of like programmatic ways of dealing with this, other than before the show I was mentioning to you that an organization that I'm involved with now does kind of turns it around. They only allow their employees to resolve domains that are on an allow list, right? So if you don't,
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, which is, I think what you were going to say, off the hook crazy.
No, it's just one super strong security stance, but also a ton of friction for your users. So that's that pure example of the balance of efficiency and friction, in the security trade-off. So for those users, let's say things change fast and they want to go check out a new site. I'm assuming there's some sort of process to go request that from IT or security, and it has to be vetted and approved, and that could be days and days. But huge amount of security,
mm-hmm.
Right? And it's not foolproof. Certainly, we see valid domains get taken over and serve malware. But the way I think about this is, I kind of assume that my users are going to get led to some sort of hostile site in some way. So how do I protect them from that? And that's usually comes down to controlling the browser extensions, making sure the browser is well patched, making sure I've got EDR or other things, and phishing resistant logins and all that sort of stuff that wraps around my users being led to hostile sites. And how do I minimize that ability to do stuff that I don't want them to do? And I'll give you a somewhat off topic, but similar example. I had an employee who was trying to work with a vendor, and the vendor had a remote support app that they wanted them to load to give them access to the desktop. And our policies don't allow it. We block it. And so they open a help desk ticket like, hey, we can't do this. We need to do it. I'm like, yeah, no, you're not supposed to do it. Right. So it's one of those things of they think they're doing what they're supposed to do. It's not their, they didn't do anything wrong. They're trying to solve a problem. They're working with a vendor. The vendor says do X. They try to do X, and X blocks, and they're like, wait, let me go talk to help desk. But by blocking that, and you could argue one way or the other. I mean, what we'd say is there's a different sanction tool to do desktop sharing. See if the vendor will do that. We also stop other third-party malicious desktop sharing or remote access tools from getting loaded. It's an example in my mind of employees are going to do what they need to do to get their job done, and we can't expect them to be smart. It's the wrong way to say it. To be so versed in cybersecurity the way we are, to have the knowledge or the skill set with everything else they need to do every day to detect and block this sort of stuff. So, I mean, there's other tools, like there's secure web gateways that can give some level of proactive blocking to no malicious sites, but I imagine that's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. So sorry, I just kind of went down a bit of a rabbit hole in this one.
Oh, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's all about layers of protection, figuring out like how do you successively minimize the risk. And so things like web gateways can reduce it. But then I think you really have to get down into addressing the harms that can come through, again, using phishing resistant credentials and basically identifying the potential harms that could come if something is successful, and figuring out how do you address that if you assume that like all of your preventive controls failed. How do you prevent the next step in the attack chain from happening? How do you block credential theft? How do you block malware installation and so on? So having an answer to each of those is very important.
Yeah. And detection, right? I mean, assuming you can't block it, how do you detect it and contain it?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's an interesting problem. I also wonder, too, if there's a bit of an economic aspect to this. Like Park Domains used to serve ads, and I wonder if it's just far more profitable now to serve malware.
I would assume so. I'm not certain that that online ads are nearly as profitable as they once were. And so I think you're probably right.
So there's maybe a little bit of a perverse incentive to some of these domain registrars to not police this very much.
Yeah, and I also think that there's this all exists on a continuum, right? There's people who do this with intent, right? But then there's also people who are basically just being used. They have a fleet of Park domains, and they're subscribed to an advertising service, and unbeknownst to them, that advertising service might itself be legitimate, but then subcontracts with somebody else who is not, or it doesn't have a robust method of keeping out malicious ads, and so it's just hijacked by bad actors.
Google themselves serve malicious ads through their ad network still. Right?
True.
So that's always my argument of like when a website's trying to guilt trip me into stopping my ad blocker. I'm like, tell you what, when I can be assured there's no malware served by the ad network, I'll think about it. Until then, sorry.
It's probably not going to happen.
No, but those advertisers could push back on those ad networks and say, until I mean, yeah, I'm not like, it's not like I'm writing them a letter every time and explaining it, but that's the only way I think that's going to change is, there's probably some percentage of the population like me that blocks because of malicious, although there's probably far more that just hate ads. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this other than it's not going to change because I want it to change. I think the advertisers are the ones who are going to have to force Google to clean up their act.
Yeah, there's been a very interesting trend as of late, sites like YouTube and even CNBC, they actively detect if you're running an ad blocker and will prevent you from, it's an arms race, right? Like, every time they come up with some method of detecting ad blockers, then, the ad blockers, themselves make changes. So I'm not, that aside, it's an interesting thing because, some of these sites are trying to I think, change behavior in a way that, is problematic at a high level.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So anyway, moving on. Next is what's old is new again, device code phishing. So as a reminder, device code phishing is a fancy way of saying that you're entitling a device rather than a user under some kind of user account, and so it's a little bit different than what we normally think about, and it's primarily aimed at identity services like Microsoft's Entra ID and whatnot, where have a lot of sophisticated flexibility, such that you can entitle applications and devices to act on behalf of users, and rather than having that requiring a user to authenticate each time with a password and a multi-factor token, you can actually entitle a device. And so that's what the story is about. So this one comes from the Hacker News, and the title here is Russia-linked hackers use Microsoft 365 device code phishing for account takeovers. I think this is not the first time we've talked about this, but what is changing here is that the tooling required to pull off these attacks is becoming really low bar. Like, there's a very, very low bar to entry now. These are sold on Telegram channels and Signal channels as a service offerings that require very little in the way of technical knowledge. And really what this article describes is a current wave of attacks. And I want to impress on everybody that this is not necessarily, I would say, don't focus so much on that specific adversary and the intention behind what's described here. Think about the methodology and the outcomes. So anyway, this particular attack is using compromised emails that are that belong to government or military organizations, which basically means that they've already conducted some sort of successful attack to compromise email servers or email accounts of legitimate people or legitimate organizations, and then they turn around and they use those accounts to send emails to their intended victims, to the attackers' intended victims, which is could be NGOs or companies, and they portray themselves as well, first off, they're building a rapport with the victim over email, but eventually they offer, typically as described in this article, some sort of an interview or a meeting, and they offer up an agenda. And that agenda looks like it's hidden behind an authenticated link to a Microsoft Teams folder or OneDrive folder that requires authentication,
which is common, right? A lot of companies do that, right? That's a normal flow.
Specifically in government, you don't.
Yeah.
You're not just going to get a open, unless it's on a publicly accessible website. You're just not going to get access to to files like that. So it's not necessarily sending up alarms when you would see that, because if you have interacted with government agencies like that, you've probably seen similar things before, and so it's taking advantage of of that the familiarity with those sorts of processes. But it's presenting a page in your browser that is it's very contrived, and it fools the victim into effectively creating an entitlement that the attacker can use to then act with the permissions of the victim's Microsoft 365 account. And again, it's not necessarily a new attack. It's been described. I think we talked about it earlier in the year when this was covered. It was kind of big news at the time, but this is now becoming very much industrialized, and so I think it's now time to take it seriously. Now they do. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think what this tells me is that for a long time we were saying, hey, use some sort of MFA, use some sort of authenticator, some sort of token. This is making that advice, unfortunately, a little weaker. It's getting to a point where those device code, token codes, or whatever they are getting easier and easier, more commoditized to be stolen and be reused. And then once they get one, they can add access and such. So I think what this screams to is, hey, we've got to continue to migrate to phishing resistant passkeys, FIDO, that sort of stuff to be able to fight this. And it's getting more urgent, I think, as what used to be a more sophisticated attack is now getting very simple.
The recommendation to mitigate this is, by the way, at least in Microsoft 365, is to enable conditional access policies to block device code flows. And I actually don't know anybody who uses that for legitimate purposes, but I suppose that that's not impossible, but they do recommend if you are using them to implement some additional protections, like only allow it for certain user accounts and only allow it based on certain IP address ranges and things like that. But I don't know anybody that's actually using it for legitimate purposes. And if you don't need it, you should definitely turn it off.
Yeah, but I think a lot of companies just have it on by default.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an interesting problem where I go back to, what is Microsoft's duty of care here? Should they be proactively telling their customers, hey, this is getting weaker, here's the problem, here's what we recommend instead? Not buried in an article, not buried in a knowledge base, but proactively reaching out and saying, we're seeing this, and here's step-by-step what we recommend, and here's the implication to your customers, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know. They may be doing that. I'm not a Teams or a 365 shop, so I don't know. But I think it's a broader question about cloud providers in general, of when they see these trends and they see these attack types, it's probably a double-edged sword for them, especially if they push this out to less sophisticated organizations. They probably are going to get slammed with, reputational damage, unwarranted reputational damage, where, why am I keep getting warned? Maybe your service is insecure and I shouldn't use your service, versus them trying to help, or I don't know how to do this, you need to walk me through it, or whatever. I think there's probably a mix of reactions to a cloud provider or a SaaS provider trying to push this out.
For sure. What I'm sort of surprised about is that this is it's permitted by default. So it seems like Microsoft would do well to turn that around and have it, require a conditional access policy to enable that. That maybe that's just crazy thinking on my part, but that seems,
and like a signature like of you understand the risk,
right?
You click here,
right. Well, I mean, not even necessarily that. Just requiring someone to take the overt step of turning it on, because if you're not, unless you actually need that, you're probably never going to go looking for that. So I don't know. Maybe it's more commonly used than I'm thinking, and that's why they don't want to change the default behavior.
I'm sure that they probably can get an idea of how many customers are utilizing what authentication type.
I would assume so. Then they have to figure out how many of those are fraudulent first.
Right. And there's no good deed goes unpunished. Like I was saying earlier, I'm sure if they sent out a missive or change this behavior, there's probably some amount of customers they would lose, or push back, or would complain, or whatever. And that's a cost too. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. And yeah, part of our goal here, although the people listening to the show probably are proactively understanding this stuff already, but it's reaching those less security savvy, busy admins who don't think about this stuff, that I think is the real problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I think you should go back to walking the earth and doing county password inspections door to door, like we talked about many years ago. And you can tell them about this.
It's a very good idea. I gotta get back on the road
and sell some Jerry Scout cookies while you're at it.
I'm just going to leave that one there. All right. Next is a very interesting story that's been kind of taken the media by storm in the security world, but I kind of equate it to like the dog rides on skateboard story. It's like, anyway, this one comes from.
Is it a North Korean dog though?
Maybe. I think so. This one comes from Cybersecurity News, and the title here is Amazon catches North Korean IT worker by tracking tiny 110 millisecond keystroke delays. So as the title alludes to, Microsoft apparently, I guess, is doing some kind of telemetry analysis on.
You said Microsoft, you mean Amazon?
I'm sorry, Amazon. Doing some kind of telemetry analysis on their employees to be able to detect this. But what they found in this instance was that somebody who purported to be in the US with an expected latency of less than 50 milliseconds had 110 millisecond latency was enough to tip them off that person was in fact not in the US and was actually in North Korea. I'm
going to correct you, sir.
All right.
Because you're wrong. And you're going to sit there in your wrongness and you're going to get used to it.
Sure.
So I was curious about that because this didn't make any sense to me. I mean, we can continue on with the story, but the 110 millisecond being an indicator of coming from overseas is crap. I don't agree. That doesn't make sense. That's not how networking works. That's not how physics works. They are wrong. And so I dug into it. And it's not Amazon's fault. I think the media got this wrong. I started really trying to read into how in the world this is going, because what if I just have a bad ISP? What if I'm coming off of like whatever? That's not indicative. And also what's really happening here, according to some other blogs I read. So I went and read a Remio blog that I can share with you. It's not that the lag was an indicator. It was the consistency of the lag that was indicative of a remote access tool being used. So, quoting from Remio's blog first, and we can post the link to this in the show notes if you want, but the 110 millisecond lag discovered by Amazon wasn't a fluke. It's a byproduct of the tools used to route traffic. When a worker in China or North Korea connects to a laptop sitting in Arizona living room, the signal passes through multiple tunnels. The tell was human typing has a variable rhythm, bursts. Remote desktop protocols, or KVMs, over IP setups often buffer the inputs, creating a uniform delay. So a little bit later in the article, Stephen Schmidt, Amazon's chief security officer, described how his team first spotted the threat. The actor appeared to be a standard remote employee based in the United States. However, the security telemetry of the laptop showed a persistent gap between the key presses and the system registration. This wasn't just lag. It was a uniform 110 millisecond input lag anomaly. A normal internet connection fluctuates. A script or high-end remote management tool trying to synchronize a video feed with a keystroke often creates a flattened, predictable latency curve to prevent jitter. This artificial smoothness flagged the user. The keystroke latency detection led investigators to the physical location of the device. While the digital worker was likely thousands of miles away, the laptop was physically located in an illicit laptop farm in Arizona.
Interesting. So it wasn't that there was latency. It was that the latency was always the same.
Correct. And because I was reading this earlier when we were getting ready for the show, because occasionally I do a little bit of prep, like when the mood strikes me. And I kept reading this like, oh, well, the lag indicates coming from overseas. I'm like, that's not, no, that's not good enough. And so as I dug deeper, I do think Amazon correctly talked about this, and a bunch of the various news reporting got it wrong and started reporting that the lag itself was the indicator and that not the consistency of the lag.
Interesting.
Including you, sir. You.
Well, instead of reading other blogs, I was actually building a really nice presentation.
It's fair. I mean, if anything we've learned about influencers, it doesn't need to be accurate. It needs to be pretty.
Exactly.
So anyway, what also is interesting to me as I burn time while you take a sip of your water or vodka or whatever it is you're drinking, I'm very curious what technology they used to detect this, and that I was not able to uncover, which is fine. I don't expect them to tell us, but I do expect the vendor to violate a non-disclosure and trumpet it, which probably will come out soon.
I have to believe there's going to be an army of marketing coming out of the woodwork, talking about how they can detect this sort of thing. That's really interesting, because I was actually going to kind of call foul on that latency, because like if you are using a satellite connection or a crappy 5G or LTE connection, like you can pretty easily get multi-hundred millisecond latency. So that didn't make sense, but what you just described makes a whole lot more sense. Which I actually did not know that was something that KVMs did. That's news to me. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I want to do some more research too. But look, man, we are just correcting the record on this show. That's what we do.
Huh. Fascinating. Well, really clever. I wonder if there are other KVMs that don't buffer like that.
Good question. And it's not just KVMs; it's also like RDP. And I get it. Like they're trying to match up the video, and I get that. You would get this uncanny valley feel when your keystrokes aren't matching up with what displays back to you over KVM. So I see why they're doing it for user experience, and that can then be a tell that you're using some sort of remote access or KVM. So it's clever.
Yeah, that's for sure. This is becoming a really, really big problem. Like we've talked about this a whole bunch of times, and I'm just going to go off on a tangent for a second, say how frustrating it is to watch qualified people struggle to find jobs. Meanwhile, we have this prevalence of North Korean IT workers apparently pretty successfully getting fully remote jobs. So it's the dichotomy there is just kind of stunning. So I still think that to some extent this is going to be a driver to at least for some companies, in-person work.
You bite your tongue, sir. How dare you?
I don't agree. I mean, that's the reason I'm unemployed. I don't agree with in-person work. Don't misunderstand. Like I put my money where my mouth is.
You're right. I don't. I mean, I'm being snarky about it because I don't want to go back to an office, but I think your prediction is probably accurate. And to Amazon's credit, just like another bit of information, apparently this was not a direct hire, but a contractor. Amazon's kind of saying, hey, we have better, background checks and such to try to catch this. And so it's interesting. It is a real problem.
They also mention in here about some of the tells, like they said this is a quote, red flags include mangled English idioms or articles like a, and the. And one thing, like I've worked with a lot of people from a lot of parts of the world in my career, and it is not uncommon for non-native English speakers, even if they're here in the US, to screw that up. Like that is a very, very minor, in the scheme of things, very minor infraction on the English language, and it's very common. And so I am worried that that's going to be used a little too aggressively as a signal. I mean, maybe it is, if it's used as one of many signals, I suppose maybe that that helps, but like by itself, I think that's pretty weak. So that's my view.
Yeah, fair. The other thing that caught my eye in this article is that this is increasing, and that Amazon said they thwarted over 1,800 such hiring attempts. And Schmidt, again, the CISO, I think his name is, that his chief security officer, they detected a 27% quarter over quarter increase in detected and stopped attempts by North Koreans to get hired. So this is growing, and I think a lot of companies, especially through remote work first or remote work at all, probably are getting victimized by this and don't necessarily know it. Like in my discussions with just a couple of HR groups, like that's not on their radar yet, and it probably should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is definitely on the upswing, for sure. It's pervasive and getting worse, I would say. And it also creates a big problem for hiring managers, right? Because now you gotta, you have to worry about this as well. So I think all this just compounds and makes the job market just awful.
And one last thing I'll say, like, we're not just being anti-North Korean. There's laws against hiring North Koreans. Like, they're a sanctioned country. We're not allowed to hire them. It's not like we're just being protectionist here.
Correct. A lot of countries actually have similar laws, but yeah, it is absolutely, you can be pretty severely penalized for knowingly hiring North Koreans. Absolutely. Whether whether or not that is makes sense, that's beyond my pay grade. It just is what it is.
I mean, you could run for office. I'd vote for you.
I don't know if I'd vote for me.
County password inspector. It's how it starts, man.
True. All right. The next story is about problematic AI-generated proof of concepts. And the title here this is from Dark Reading. The title here is Fake Proof and AI Slop Hobbles Defenders. This is a follow-on to the React to Shell, which really should have been called Reactor Meltdown, in my view. Like total missed.
It's clever.
Missed opportunity. But the story here is that a lot of security teams, and I back when I was important, I did this too, right? We would try to either find or create exploit code to figure out when there was a new significant vulnerability, try to figure out, are we exposed? Like, are we vulnerable to this new thing? And then that would help kind of prioritize and guide us on what we needed to fix first and second and third. And the story here is about how, that's still very important, but now increasingly people and companies are starting to rely on AI to help create those proofs of concept. But the challenge is that the proofs of concept that AI is creating, at least in some instances, and then provided for public use, are not accurate. And so they're creating this problem of false negatives because they were constructed, or the proof of concept by the AI was written with certain assumptions in place, like components that are not default, and so it's exploiting things that are not necessarily present in all instances of the exploitable code, and that if you try to run will conceivably, if you're running one of these problematic versions, at best it's giving you a false negative. It's telling you like this, your instance is not vulnerable, even though it actually is. It's just that AI code was written in such a way that it depended on some other things being in place that isn't the default. And this isn't a hypothetical. Like, they're talking about how there were quite a few variations of exploit code published that people were using, like they were published for the purpose of helping to determine whether or not you're vulnerable, weren't working correctly. And so, this article is talking about the kind of the peril there. Like, if you are relying on that to help determine where you're vulnerable, if you're vulnerable, and prioritizing things, it's going to lead you astray.
Or as I saw, you're relying on the mastodons and the Twitters of the world for open source intelligence by researchers, and they spun up a bunch of there was a bunch of fog of war on this early that I think was contributed to by this problem of people.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're listening to somebody who's reputable, but they got caught up in this, and they're like, it's not that big a deal, and then you potentially stand down your urgency around this, and they got it wrong. So I think we're at the beginning stages of not understanding, or of now understanding, some of the inaccuracies, yet confidently inaccurate outcomes of some of these AI programming models, and we need to be careful. And so to me, it's like, okay, who do you come back to and trust as doing the proper due diligence in this circumstance that you're leaning into for giving you guidance, if you don't have, especially if you don't have a team sophisticated enough to do it yourself, or capable enough, which is also a little bit of dangerous to me of, hey, if I only care about things that I can prove are exploitable, that means that my team is as good as every potential hacker out there, which is a lot to ask, and as creative and as innovative and as imaginative. So it's a tough one. It feels like we're looking for a prioritization rubric here, which makes sense of what's exploitable, but we're looking for shortcuts to test exploitability in a way that feels very unreliable and untrustworthy right now.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And in the past, it would have required somebody, with enough knowledge. And I appreciate your comment about how, like, it's even if it's written by a human, it still presumes that they are as sophisticated as any adversary out there who and capable of writing an actual working exploit in order to fully vet whether or not you're vulnerable. I think that's appreciate that, but I think what AI is doing is lowering the bar. Like, now you don't have to have people on staff who claim to have that. Like, you can anybody can, your GRC person can like go into chat GPT or perplexity and try to point it at the documentation about the vulnerability and ask it to come up with a proof of concept exploit that probably will execute. Like, and at best, like, setting aside all the other potential problems, like it could itself be malicious or cause problems. Like, setting all of that aside, now you have again, these AI agents don't come back and say, like, this might work, right? Don't rely on it too much. No, it's like it just replies back with, like, here is the code that to tell you whether or not you're vulnerable. And I think therein lies the problem, because now you've got people who are who aren't really qualified to vet what is coming out and determine whether or not that's actually likely based on what of the exploit to fully determine whether or not you're vulnerable. They're actually coming out and being able to generate this stuff. So that's where I think the next horizon of problems comes in. And it's not necessarily different than what you have today, because, like, in let's be honest, like, in the past, when a new vulnerability came out, what was the first thing all the security teams did? Was they were like hammering forums and mailing lists and Telegram channels and whatnot, looking for a proof of concept. Like, so it's not necessarily a new concept, but in the past, that proof of concept was often written by somebody who was either involved in the initial discovery of the vulnerability, and so I kind of had intimate knowledge of it, or you know, otherwise some kind of a qualified security researcher. But anyway, the bar is substantially lower now, and not only are companies and people creating these vibe coded proof of concepts, but then they're turning around and providing them out as like authoritative, test harnesses to figure out whether you're vulnerable or not. So now, like when you go and search for POC code for any, common large scale vulnerability that comes out now, you're finding like dozens or hundreds of instances because everybody's creating them. And that's the
with highly variable levels of quality and capability.
Yes. And they're in.
I think this will settle down, but right now it's a bit the Wild West. And, also, hey, somebody comes out today and says, hey, it's not vulnerable. And 2 days later, suddenly it is. Like you can't just take one answer and assume that it's going to stay non-vulnerable. I don't know. It's a tough problem. It's a really tough problem.
I think that it's a fair point to dwell on for a second. Like, in the case of Log4j, I mean, like if you look at all of this, all of the really big, especially open source vulnerabilities, whether it was Heartbleed or Shellshock or Log4j or this new React one, there were successive vulnerabilities found after like the big sparkling one. There were a period of successive waves of vulnerabilities found, and it's not necessarily surprising because like a lot of these, there's just so much code out there that it isn't until something big like that is found that there's like this giant rush by security researchers to figure out like what else is there in that code. And so you shouldn't be surprised that after a big vulnerability is found in React or Log4j, that people are now suddenly looking at that code, picking it apart with a fine-tooth comb and finding new things. And so in the case of React, there were new vulnerabilities found. Now, I think they were less severe. They were denial of service vulnerabilities, but like, nonetheless, if you had patched before, like now you got to go patch again because there's again, not as severe, but there's vulnerabilities again. So it's a good point. All right. Next up is Cisco Secure Email. And oh my goodness, if I can control my mouse, that would be awesome.
I get it. It's a new technology for you. It's hard.
I know.
You'll get it.
I'm old.
Give yourself time.
I'm getting old, and one thing I found, like old people and mice don't get along well. So
maybe you should have just said you had a cat running through that disrupted things, because that would have been cuter.
That would have been smart.
A complete lie, but cuter.
That would have been my agentic AI has gone a little haywire. I need to get it under control. So this is from HelpNet Security. The title here is Cisco Email Security Appliances Rooted and Backdoored via Still Unpatched 0-Day. And I looked today, as far as I can tell, there still is not a patch for this. It is, I think the vulnerability was first disclosed on December 10th. It is now December 20th.
Ouch.
So this is a vulnerability that impacts their email security appliance. And it's not like what I would call the business end of the email security appliance. It's not like the inbound SMTP or outbound SMTP server. It's the web access to the spam quarantine, which, by the way, is not enabled by default. So at the same time, though, I'm going to bet that most companies, most users of this tool probably turn that on because it's a pretty useful feature. But again, this is made worse because that thing really shouldn't be exposed to the internet. Like, there's no reason that you should allow anybody on the entire internet to attempt to connect to the web interface.
If I'm not supposed to be able to do it, why do they let me? Come on now.
Well, it's not very zero trust now, is it? Right? Like
it's like mountain lions. If not friend, why friend shaped? Explain that to me.
Right. Why do they purr?
Right. Really, this is the internet's fault, if you ask me.
Why is it an option if it was so problematic? Why am I allowed to do it?
Right. See? Who out there is protecting me from me is really the question I'm trying to ask. Because anyway, I know this is your bugaboo about management interfaces exposed to the internet, and I completely agree. I just like to poke at it a little bit.
I think what we have to start doing, kind of like building permits, like, when you want to install a new mail appliance, like you have to go to your local city or county, you have to apply for a permit, and you have to like put a sign out front, or maybe you have to put it on your website. Maybe that would make more sense. Right.
And then your cousin Larry will do unlicensed email security deployments for cheaper.
Right. You have to have the county, the county email inspector come out and verify your install.
Every problem can be solved by more laws. We just need more laws, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I don't think there's, a lot of novelty here, right? It's fairly straightforward. This email appliance has a vulnerability in the web interface that controls access to the spam quarantine, which is, I would estimate, a pretty popular feature. It's not turned on by default, but it is remotely exploitable without authentication. It's being actively exploited now. Cisco is basically saying that if you have this feature enabled and you have that that web panel exposed to the internet, you should assume that you've been compromised, and they give you some steps to take. Now, very conveniently, every time I've tried to access that web page, it's been down. So I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. Hopefully it's back up. I haven't checked it in a couple of hours, but anyway, this is not awesome. But again, I think it comes back to the importance of least privilege.
And just reduce your attack surface, people. I mean, not even least privilege. Just we used to, and I've said this so many times on the show, we used to make it very difficult and a lot of friction to expose things to the internet. It is way too easy right now to expose things to the internet. And I think companies need to really, really hey, if you want this open to the internet, there's a bunch of hoops you need to jump through and a bunch of certifications and sign off, et cetera. But I get it. That's a lot of friction. That's not how we do things. Our cloud management folks just need to get things done, blah, blah, blah. But this keeps happening.
Yeah, over and over again. And I think it's a little bit worse because now we have this this structural North Star that lots of organizations and architectural blueprints aspire to, which is zero trust. And I'm not saying that zero trust is pushing people to do this. I'm saying that zero trust is being used as the excuse for people to not put things behind the firewall, because then
zero trust is. I say zero trust is great if all the code is bulletproof and never has a vulnerability.
Yes. If you can fully rely on, identity controls, that machine and user authentication to govern access, like that, it makes good sense. But it breaks down when you factor in unauthenticated exploits. Like it falls apart. And but at the same time, I don't think that that's really the intention, right? I think it's being contorted as a way to save money or make things easier for some organizations. The same way, like, agile is used to do away with planning, right? Like it's just an abused concept.
Well, this is why I have -1 trust. I don't even trust zero trust.
That's smart. That's smart. You should write a book.
Thought leadership right here on display.
You should write a book. That'll be good.
Writing a book is hard, man. It takes work.
Hey, have you seen that there's AI now that can write for you? ChatGPT, write me a book on -1 trust.
Which they'll just assume I'm talking about the company OneTrust and just it'll all go bad.
Nobody's actually going to read it.
You know, you make a fine point. Like nobody's listening this deep into the show either.
So now there was one other aspect that I wanted to get into here. Like a lot of this post is about the threat actor that's, you know, assumed to be involved, and one of the other stories, similar thing. You know, it's attributed to a nation state threat actor, and I got to wondering, like, does it make it more or less likely that companies will take a given threat seriously if it's being reported as exploited by, or maybe the exploitation is only seen by one of these nation state threat acters? And
that's an interesting question.
The way the reason I ask that question is, like, if I'm of the mindset that, like, I fear being attacked by the Russians or the Iranians or the North Koreans or the Syrians or like whoever, right? And I see this, I'm like, oh my gosh, here's my opportunity to go and defend myself. Like, that's one way. But then the other logic is, well, like, I'm not on the radar for the North Koreans or the Russians or the Iranians or the Syrians or the, like, and so therefore, like, I'm not going to worry about it. And it seems like the kind of two ends of the spectrum there. And I just wonder, what is the implication, like the aggregate implication behind a lot of this reporting being, so focused on the attack being on a particular vulnerability being conducted by some threat actor, when like, we should know at this point that, like, that's just an ephemeral thing. Like, right, at a point in time, it's being used by maybe a specific threat actor, but, like, that's just, what that researcher saw, or, point in time snapshot of what's going on in the world. And I don't think anybody should take solace in that, like, it's only that threat actor that's ever going to use that vulnerability or that technique. And it's just something that's been on my mind, because, again, like, all of our news is largely filtered through these media outlets who are, and I'm not trying to disparage them in any way. I mean, they're reporting it accurately as it's being reported to them, but it I think it colors how it's being received.
Sure. Yeah, a couple of good points in there that I heard, which is, I've never really cared about the attribution aspect. It doesn't change my world as a blue teamer. I think it's interesting to executives. It's interesting to law enforcement. It's interesting to politicians. It's interesting from a TTP perspective, right? If what are the trends that are common, but it doesn't really affect me if it's coming from China or North Korea or Canada or Billy down the street in his basement. It's the same problem set. And, these attack types can be easily used by lots of different people, just like your mom. So it's never exclusive.
Clever.
I try. I was looking for my opportunity to sneak that in. I'm not going to go further with it. Anyway, I do think we have this unhealthy obsession with nation state, like, attribution. And I just, maybe I'm wrong. I've never, like, all these big research shops are always trying to do it. They're always trying to figure this out. They're always trying to say, hey, this is so and so, and I get it. It's very interesting to them, and it's interesting to a lot of other people, and it matters. It just doesn't matter to me so much because I still have to defend my company regardless of where it's coming from. But there's this other side of that equation, which is, oh, you just can't stop a nation state. I'm like, okay, so what do I do? Just give up? Do I just like roll over and die? No, like, I still have to do what I have to do. So I don't know. I've always been very conflicted on this attribution issue, um, at least from my little narrow view of cybersecurity. I'm not saying it's right for everybody.
There is one. I'm not going to. I'm not entirely down on attribution. There is one. I found one specific use case. If you are under attack, like you have evidence that you've been compromised and you are in the middle of incident response and you become aware that this particular attack is very likely at this point in time to be conducted by this particular actor, you can actually look and see like what other stuff does that actor do, and it might give you an idea of where else to look in your environment for clues. Like if if this particular actor is known to attack this particular Cisco vulnerability, but then like we know that once they get in, they tend to do this one particular thing with Active Directory. Right now that gives you an idea. Like, hey, I should go look to see if they've done that, or look for the common tactics. But broadly speaking, I think it's kind of a whiz bang, or gee whiz, like, hey, isn't that interesting? It was conducted by the North Koreans or the Iranians or whoever. And I do think that there is a big component of it, which is this attack was conducted by some state-sponsored entity, and therefore, like, we should be given some grace, because, like, if they hadn't gotten in this way, they would have gotten in some other way, because, like, they were hell-bent on getting into our network, and therefore, like, there was just nothing we could have done to keep them out. They just found a particular avenue of opportunity, and they took it. It was always going to end that way, I think, is kind of the way that it's positioned when when attribution is really factored in, especially in the reporting. Although I will say, having said that, I haven't seen a whole lot of breach disclosures that actually mention that anymore in like the past like 18 months. It isn't like it used to be.
Yeah, you make a good point about the TTPs, right? If I know one TTP likely leads to another TTP, that's definitely useful. I agree. So common attack patterns, I think, are certainly helpful. And so maybe there is some of that there. Right? I mean, you make a good point that I'll have to think about that. Maybe I'm a little too dogmatic about on this one. It's funny, too, because we said all this and we just talked about North Koreans earlier. And, it's very, very much an aspect of knowing the attribution of the people involved. But that's a little different because of sanctions and laws and such. But I don't know. This is a complicated field, man. It's tough.
It definitely is. And I don't understand is why or whether it's only North Koreans who are doing this. Like, they're not the only sanctioned entity who's starved for cash, right? So, like, why do we not see Iranians doing it? Or
well, we just don't know. Like, they very well could be. It just may not be being detected and reported as such.
Right. Or it's not done at the same scale, maybe.
Maybe, or like when somebody finds North Koreans and kick them up, are they really North Koreans? Like, I mean, are they truly tracing it back to North Korea, or is it just a placeholder for, yep, that was another, North Korean dude? Well, maybe he's coming from Iran or China. You make a good point. Like, why is it exclusive to North Korea? It doesn't have to be. Could be Canadians. Got to watch them people.
We love you, Canada, by the way.
We do. I have a lot of good Canadian friends.
Anyway, so that was the last story for today. So I've posted our links on this page, but just a reminder that you can find, especially for those who are listening.
Typo on the first line, sir.
Typo on the first line.
This is episode 334.
Oh, yeah. Shoot. Darn it. Yeah. So there you go. Should be episode 334, not 332.
Swear to this is absolutely coming up on your review. Absolutely. I'm documenting
As it should. As it should. As it should.
I'm sorry. Please, back to your wrap up.
Our website, our YouTube site is at Defensive Podcasts. I did confirm we actually are the #1 result for defensive security podcast now. So that's
nice.
That's a big thing.
How many people did you have to kill to fix that, by the way?
Just I don't like to talk about that. Don't want to talk about that. That's proprietary information.
That's fair.
Anyway, I posted your links, so you want to read them off to our listeners?
I do. You can find me on X and infosec.exchange, which, by the way, is your phenomenal Mastodon server. So props to you. At Lurg, L-E-R-G, on both.
Awesome. And I am at Jerry at infosec.exchange. And with that, we'll talk again on next week. And we have, in case we haven't said it before, happy holidays, everybody. Hope you had a good year. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.